Hello, my saucy, pert, and greasy friends. Today, our interview is with a guy who is a never Mormon, but has spent his life studying new religious movements. And in the grand scheme of things, Mormonism is new. As a religious studies scholar, Joe Laycock has a unique lens through which to see groups that some may describe as cults, though they don't use that term in his field, to pick up patterns and just document how humans use rituals to try to make sense of the chaos of the universe. He has written a number of books about the occult, Satanism, and how it interplays into pop culture, including his new book, The Exorcist Effect. Here is our interview with him. Like and sub if you enjoy. It really does help us so much. And if you're listening and would like to see our faces, head over to our baby YouTube channel at someplace underneath. Someplace underneath.
And so you work in a lot of like religious and horror, like how religion equates to horror films right now. Do you see any like current ones being played right now that you're like, oh, this is from the church, this is propaganda?
Yeah, well, I mean, we just learned that the Catholic Church paid money to get the book Michelle Remembers put out, right?
Yeah.
Which I found pretty striking because we think of the organizations like the Catholic Church as being a bit more neutral about media. The Pope's Exorcist, obviously, with Russell Crowe, is meant to be a very kind of pro-Catholic film. The guy that's based on, Gabriel Amorth, he said, I can only do what I'm doing because of the movie The Exorcist. He said, if it wasn't for that movie, I would have never been able to basically resurrect exorcism in the Catholic Church. I've never been able to form the International Association of Exorcists. I owe it all that movie. And then they make a movie about him, and his organization says, well, this is kind of corny. Like, we don't like how you portrayed our founder. And I'm like, you reap what you sow. So it's a cycle of sort of movies and then actual religious culture and then more movies again.
Wow. There's not even the crux of what I want to ask you about today, but I don't know if you looked into or know anything about Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell and the murders they did 2 years ago. They are fringe LDS people, but they're both serving life sentences right now. And Lori Vallow, who was like a faithful LDS member, and Chad had developed this sort of extension within like the prepper community. They're a part of like a lot of the people I sent you as reference points. They were also in that group, and they ended up committing, I think, up 6 or 7 different murders until they were caught. But they were going off of Mormon doctrine mixed with the prepper stuff. And Lori's adult son has now been speaking out about his experiences with her. He's one of the only of her children who wasn't killed. And he has been talking quite a bit about how his mom would talk to him about her visions, and he knew even at the time that she was referring to things that they had watched together in a movie.
Oh no.
Wow.
So she's like me, that I'm like, I remember. And they're like, Amber, that was a 90s sitcom. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah. And Lori and Chad, the murderers, had developed this concept of light and dark people, and was using the term zombies. If somebody was turned into a dark zombie, they needed to die, and that was including her children, his spouse, like a bunch of family members, because they believed that they themselves were members of the 144,000, which is, it's, I'm sure you know are aware of that, but it's most known through Jehovah's Witnesses, but also is used in other groups, including fringe LDS people. So Lori and Chad believed that they were leading the 144,000 at the end days. And a lot of their prophecies came, her adult son said, from things that they had watched in movies and TV and stuff.
Wow. And, the term for this in the study of folklore is ostension. where you have a story and the story sort of comes to life or someone acts it out. And, with the Satanic Panic, we know there were a lot of people that were being hypnotized to remember if their parents were Satanists and were coming up with things from horror movies. But it hadn't occurred to me that if you're in a religion that has a tradition of prophecy, where kind of your sort of subjective feelings and thoughts could actually be God speaking to you, that could be another sort of vector through which ostension of movies and things could start to play out in the real world. That's really interesting.
That is something I actually really would love to talk to you about, the idea of prophets in a movement like the LDS Church. It's obviously not exclusive to the LDS Church, but are a lot of new modern movements based around the idea of having spiritual, like having visions, having God tell the leader of the church, and the leader of the church then telling the people in the church what God is telling them to do? Is that something that you see throughout all of the new religious movements?
Yeah, so if you want to start a new religion, there's basically only three moves that you can make, right? So one is revelation, right? God talk to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you have what sociologists call charisma, you can make that stick, right? I couldn't go around Austin and say I saw an angel and you have to join my church, right? But some people could, right? The second one is tradition. So either you say this is an ancient tradition, or you could make it up, right? You could persuade people that something you made up is an ancient tradition. And the third one is logic or reason, and you see this with things like non-theistic Satanism, right? Where they're like, look, I came up with this philosophy. I made it up, but check it out. Maybe you'll like it, right? So those are kind of the three moves to start a new religion, because you have to have something to what sociologists call legitimated. These are processes of legitimation. Now, if the church is already legitimate, and I work a lot on the Catholic Church, if you've already done all this thousands of years ago and you're set up and you have all your offices and institutions just the way you like it, then prophecy is dangerous, right? Because prophecy destabilizes the order that you've set up, right? So the LDS Church is kind of interesting in that they have a living prophet, which lets them pivot on issues like, can Black people be priests, right? And things like that, right? But it also creates this kind of element of instability, right? It was because it's not just the living prophet. Any LDS person can say, I heard the voice of God. I'm going to do this differently, right? And in theory, that could lead to good things, but it's just sort of inherently unstable and unpredictable. So prophecy can lead to all sorts of things, especially if we look historically at the big picture of kind of prophetic movements and what they've done in the past.
Yeah, and I know in your field, you're not necessarily trying to cast moral judgment on what you're studying, but I struggle with the idea of how a healthy environment can exist inside of a place where somebody's saying, I'm speaking for the Lord, and you need to do this. It usually seems to come back to like,
give me money,
or have sex with me. Seem the two main ones.
Yeah, is there like a case where they're like, hey, I spoke to the Lord, and the Lord said, let's give money to poor people?
I mean, it depends on kind of how we're defining prophecy, but I think a lot of so traditionally in the Bible, right, in the Old Testament, you have two types of figures. You have priests, who would be the priests of Israel, who just kind of keep the rituals going and so forth. And then you have prophets, who may or may not be priests. They're usually not, who come in and say, I have a message from God. And usually that message was, you are not being just. Right, you are not caring for orphans. You're not caring for widows, and this is angry. God's angry about this. God doesn't care about like one more dead goat. Right? God wants you to be good to people. Right, and so figures like Martin Luther King, who have framed social justice in a religious register, have been called kind of prophetic voices. Right, so I believe that prophecy can be used for good. But it also it's very easy to be very, very lazy with this, right? And just say, God said you have to have sex with me. Right? That happens a lot, right? And Karen Armstrong wrote a book called A History of God. A lot of people have it on their bookshelf. But Karen Armstrong says, if you're trying to understand God through sort of subjective mysticism or soul searching or whatever, this very easily elides into idolatry, where you basically end up kind of worshiping yourself, right? Because it turns out God's opinions are usually your opinions most of the time.
Right.
So in churches that believe in prophecy, they usually have this long process of discernment, right? And they're like, well, is it really God? Is it the devil? Are you just going crazy? What is it? But that's based on this realization that, this has the potential to be incredibly dangerous, right? When you have charismatic people saying, I have a message for everybody from God.
That leads us to another question we were discussing earlier about vertical and horizontal morality. Is this something I just recently heard about? So did Natalie. Is this something you have heard about?
Yeah, I'm not an ethics professor. I'm in religious studies, not philosophy. So maybe you can educate me about this.
No, I don't think we can, because this is literally something we saw on the internet.
No, I can. I saw one TikTok, and I'm a professor now. But basically, horizon goes side to side, vertical goes up and down. So vertical morality is, I'm going to do whatever my leader says. So my leader, maybe he's a rapist. Well, I guess that's okay because he said he was forgiven, so he's good. So if I do that and ask for forgiveness, that's fine. But more of a horizontal morality is, we're all kind of on our own plane here, and just each kind of making it good for each other.
Individualistic a little bit. I think this has been coming up a lot with, you also brought up in your notes that people are trying to make sense of what just happened in the country, and like how you can objectively look at a person and like be like, well, he committed all these really heinous crimes and it seems like a bad person, but this whole other group of people sees him as this like
God,
this savior, this good person, this man who's coming to fix everything. And I think the idea of the horizontal and vertical is why that's being brought up a lot now, is trying to like wrap your mind around how you can see somebody doing bad things and people go like, no, you just don't understand. And you had mentioned in your notes, where was it? Something about the native. I wanted to do to if you could speak about the nativist millennialist aspect of Mormonism, because I also have a lot of questions about whether or not there's been a history of any group that has a doomsday calendar turning out well at the end, I guess.
Oh, like we're going to end tomorrow maybe, but let's all hug each other and be nice about it.
Yeah, basically if there's like, even if they don't have a specific date, like the LDS doesn't have it, but if the idea of the group is based around the apocalypse, I guess.
Yeah, so we have this category in religious studies called millennialism, and millennialism just means any form of kind of coming collective salvation, right? So not just you as an individual, but your people, maybe the whole world, but definitely your people, right? And the name millennialism, millennium means 1,000. This comes from the book of Revelation, where Jesus is supposed to come back and there's supposed to be 1,000 years of peace after this apocalyptic scenario. So technically all Christian denominations are millennialists, right? Technically they would all say, yeah, I guess one day Jesus is going to come back because that's what the Bible says. But some Christian denominations don't really care about this. They've kind of moved on to other things, kind of more progressive Christian denominations. And others are like reading a newspaper every day and like checking boxes, right, to see how close we are to the end. There are other types of millennialism too. So most religions have some kind of prophecy or speculation about how the world's going to end. Heaven's Gate was a millennialist group it was about UFOs, right? The UFOs are going to come and blow up the world, but we're going to be saved because we're going to be taken away on the spaceship. And you can even have political millennialism. So Hitler said that the Third Reich would last 1,000 years. He doesn't say that he based that number on the Bible, but it seems pretty clear that is what influenced him. And even Karl Marx said, well, one day we will realize capitalism is dumb and the workers of the world will unite, and then all our problems will be over and we'll be happy. That is a millennialist ideal, right? Mm-hmm. So with cases where groups like Heaven's Gate or Jonestown or the Branch Davidians, when these groups become violent, sociologists kind of look at what happened. And one of the things that they noticed was, well, they all were anticipating this apocalyptic scenario, this sort of millennialist scenario. They had different versions of what it looked like, but they all said that's going to happen soon. And then something happened to make them kind of lose hope or worry that things weren't going to go out the way that they had told them to be. And so one conclusion by Kathy Wessinger, who's one of my mentors and someone I work with, was just, if you have a millennialist group and they feel like they're losing sight of their millennialist goal, violence is not guaranteed, but the odds of it go up quite a lot, right? So I think that MAGA is a millennialist group, right? And they said, well, Trump's going to get rid of the deep state, and he's going to get rid of the satanic pizza basement dwellers and all this stuff. It's going to be called the storm. And then when that didn't happen in 2020, they got violent, right? And we saw January 6th. So it's really the same pattern that we see with these other groups.
I guess it's sort of calming to think to yourself, oh, this is all going to end. Like, I'm maybe suffering because life is hard, right? And like, oh, this will end and then I'll go to heaven and it'll be great. Instead of thinking, no, this will continue and it'll keep going and people will forget about you. And it's just going to build and build and build on top of each other. That's like a scarier world to think about.
Yeah. And it's also really sad that a lot of times the people who take advantage of that feeling are the people who are perpetuating their suffering.
Yeah.
You know, like the ones who are causing the most pain for those people sometimes are the ones who they're going to for the answer. You know, any of us are susceptible to it. I try not to sound condescending because I wasn't raised in religion, so it's all confusing to me, which is why I'm so fascinated by it now. And we cover it so much. How we ended up with the LDS season is because of this perplexing sort of paradox that's happening.
I assume that I could fall into a cult or propaganda anytime. That's why I'm very diligent with staying offline for a certain amount of time and like taking care of my health, like not drinking so much, because I could see me getting hammered and being like, the sun isn't real, you know? And then like people would say, no, Amber, the sun is real.
But there would be somebody going, you're right, Amber.
You're right.
Come listen to us. We have this. Also, Amber had a very interesting point once, because you had brought up Teal Swan, where how that new age like wellness stuff can kind of lead you down this pipeline too, where Amber like found this guy talking about like, what was it, health or something about getting your body cleaner, and you fell asleep.
And then he woke up and talked about how, so we all know the Jewish people come from outer space. And I was like, whoa, what happened to the 6 episodes I slept through?
Yeah, it like went on autoplay, and it, like that many in, suddenly he's like on this other, this other discussion. You're like, okay, well,
I guess I'll hit stop.
Yeah, and we're now, at least academia has begun to catch up and is now using this term conspirituality.
Yeah.
But they have recognized there is a direct, spectrum from being into like homeopathy or something that seems very kind of woo-woo and innocuous to Jews are from outer space and have space lasers, right? There are all these really dark alt-right conspiracy theories.
But would that be fun if they were, though?
It would be fun.
It was hilarious in Mel Brooks's History of the World.
Yeah, right. Yeah, totally. That is also another weird part about the cross sections in the LDS world, that there is this sort of like crunchy aspect of the TikTok moms of the Mormon church. I don't know how familiar you are with the huge amount of family vloggers that are very popular and have gained a lot of wealth.
Oh yeah, that's another medium that like religious people are using. It's not movies, it's more like social media, which is what we're moving to anyway, like YouTube videos and TikToks.
For sure, but I think with the LDS group specifically, it's interesting to me because a lot of other groups are, if somebody was like in a religion that had like head coverings and stuff, and they're talking to you on TikTok, you know that they're a part of that movement. Whereas it's been sort of being studied now that the Mormon families are a little bit more covert and insidious in that they are kind of promoting the church without you knowing that they are. They're not even wearing their garments and things, which they're supposed to be, but the Mormon church has sort of been like, well, they don't need to. Don't worry about that, because they're promoting this idea of their church. And so there have been people saying that they are looking into Mormonism because of people like Ballerina Farm. I don't know. Are you familiar with any of that online discourse? Do you know who Ballerina Farm is?
Or Nara Smith?
I don't know who these people are now. So.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry about it.
It's more of the girl side of TikTok.
It is.
Because they like bake fresh bread and they live out, like they have like healthy families and they go outside and you're like, oh, I want that.
And they have like 9 children. And
right.
They're perpetuating this idea of like how that's the way that the American, they're all white. They're very,
Well, Nora Smith's half black.
Yes, she's probably one of the only actually Black women in that sphere, I think. I've never seen a different.
I don't know. Let us know. Write in.
But yeah, that they are perpetuating this very much Aryan family dynamic that is covertly Mormon, but it's being portrayed as this perfect image, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the LDS Church has always been really, really good at branding, right? So Historians of the LDS Church have said, well, they said it's like baklava or it's like lasagna. There's like these layers.
Oh.
And so it starts off with kind of this sort of back to basics attempt to kind of recreate sort of Israelite religion. And then you get these temple rites. And then the top layer is, well, we're just a model minority, right? We're the nicest church around, and we have Rice Krispie
Right.
treats, and like South Park has kind of riffed on
Yeah.
this kind of portrayal. And when I saw the Book of Mormon, there were pamphlets left by the LDS Church, and they didn't say we're offended by this or this is bigotry. They just said, hey, if you like this musical, the book's even better. And so I think that they're smarter than a lot of people realize in sort of how they market themselves.
So I guess, can I ask you, have you ever observed another religious movement in the modern era that is so entrenched in popular culture and government?
Yeah, so this is also well known in Mormon studies, which isn't my field, but that Mormons are sort of disproportionately represented in government, in the military, in big business, right? And I think that that is a strategy, right? And we have this kind of forgotten chapter in American history called the Mormon Wars. But before the Civil War, President Buchanan marched Union soldiers into Utah, and there was almost this kind of huge conflict. There was the Mountain Meadows Massacre, which some people may
Hmm.
have heard of, and we now know that Buchanan was hoping that if he got the whole country angry and upset about Mormons practicing polygamy, that they would forget about slavery and abolition, and this could have prevented the Civil War. That didn't work out. But there were sermons with people saying things like, we have to use the power of government to kill every Mormon man, woman, and child in America. So Mormons remember that, right? And they were not angels in this conflict. They killed people too. But they remember that. And so I think that they have kind of adopted this strategy of, well, then we will become the governments, right? And I think we've seen other groups do this too, like the stereotype of like the Irish cop, right? Or maybe the Polish cop, right? If you come into a country and you're a minority and you're kind of suspect, if you look white, right, that can be a good option, right? As you start to take over the institutions they're oppressing you. So I don't think the LDS is alone in this strategy, but I think that they have been very, very effective at it.
Yeah, it's much more of it that they've achieved greater success than maybe some other groups. Because, there's like, you look at the Jehovah's Witnesses, they specifically remain apolitical intentionally. They don't want to involve themselves in politics, but in that they are not a part of popular culture in general. I don't know what their numbers are. I do know that Mormons' numbers are declining, but they are already so wealthy, it doesn't really matter. They could still do a lot of
Yeah.
damage, in my opinion. That being said, the one of the other elements of this church that I find interesting that I don't know that I've seen before is that they are directly connected to like psychotherapy and higher education. And I know that other religious movements have colleges, but it seems like the LDS might, correct me if I'm wrong, might be the most successful at having themselves kind of approved of by the like wider academia world.
Right.
As far as like BYU is still extremely Mormon, but they're credentialed. They have all of the higher education things that some other Bible colleges wouldn't, and also University of Utah, which was originally founded by Mormons but is much more secular now, contains a lot of Mormons, and that's where a lot of the psychotherapists who have done some really weird, fucked up things have gone, including Barbara Snow. So is that something that you might consider to be like a unique aspect of the church?
So yeah, I mean, I do think that there does seem to be a disproportionate number of sort of people who are LDS, who are in the helping profession, psychotherapy and social work, who are promoting these really bizarre kind of conspiracy theory, satanic panic kind of ideas. There are definitely other people doing that sort of thing, but I agree that it does seem to be disproportionately LDS for how many LDS there are out there, right? In my own field of religious studies, it's been in the last, I'd say, 10 to 20 years that religious studies departments have begun to say, well, we should have a professor of Mormon studies. And at least
Interesting.
At Harvard Divinity School, there was it's not going to be like an actual Mormon, right? It's going to be like someone from some other religion who studies Mormons. And people said, well, no, we should at least consider hiring an actual LDS person. It doesn't have to be. So that's become a bit more common, is to see universities who have LDS professors who are actually doing the history of LDS, right?
Wow, that's really interesting to hear.
I'm still thinking about how you can how would you, as someone of a religious study major, I don't know, how could you teach science? Like, how can someone like a school that is a Christian Mormon school that believes like men get their own planets when they die, how can you equate that and then also teach, I don't know, astronomy, that there's Saturn and Mars and Uranus and there's Steve's planet? Like, how do they juggle those two worlds?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about The Exorcist earlier. So the Catholics have done this for a long time, right? Georgetown is a Catholic university. All the faculty are Catholic priests. They have, Catholic priest archaeologists like Father Marin. They have Catholic priest psychiatrists like Father Karras. It can be done reasonably well, right? I mean, ultimately, there's going to be a conflict, right? So, and also the Catholic Church is a bit more flexible than I think a lot of people realize about science. So they've said evolution, as far as we know, is probably correct, but we don't believe that the soul has evolved. You can't say the human soul has evolved, or that we don't know there's a human soul, right? So there's always going to be a conflict, and we can definitely see examples with Christian schools where this just sort of totally falls on its butt, right? And students are coming out of it with no science training at all because they've been taught creationism, or they've been taught that mainstream science is just a lie. So I think there's a whole spectrum of this working more or less kind of okay to just being a total disaster, right? I also don't know how many LDS people actually believe that they're going to get their own planet when they die. We know that when the LDS church started, most of their converts were not from America. They were mostly immigrants. Mm-hmm. And a lot of those immigrants would basically do anything because they were starving.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And there's people who say, well, my ancestors, they were potato famine Mormons, right? Meaning they were just in Ireland and the Mormons showed up and said they had food. And they're like, what's that? Planets? Whatever. You got food though, right?
Yeah.
I can see that. Yeah.
For sure. That was actually even studying the Mormon history for the season. This has been a conflict since like education started in the church, and there's been a back and forth between the leadership, even with BYU, about going more towards evolution and science, and then like the pullback from the conservatives, even when the church was really young. And I know that there was one guy in the early 19th century that was trying to. Not the early 20th century, was trying to like say, yes, evolution's real, but Adam and Eve is also real because they came from space. Like they were implanted to evolutionary Earth. And so that was like a way that they were trying to mesh that together even, 100 plus years ago.
Wow.
Trying to make it work, You just got to like, it's a make it work moment, I think.
To me, it's like fitting a triangle peg in a circle. Like it just doesn't work.
I feel confused by it because I didn't grow up in that, but I imagine if you grew up inside of a spiritual something that worked for you, maybe trying to make both of them work is just like a mental
gymnastics.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, I think a lot of this is just that the book of Genesis doesn't make any sense. Right.
Oh, yeah.
So in Genesis 1, God creates the whole universe and he creates human beings in his image. And then in Genesis 2, he does everything all over again, right? Except this time he creates Adam out of dirt and he creates Eve out of Adam's rib. Mm. And Bible scholars say, well, it's very obvious. Some ancient scribes said, I've got one version of the story. I'm just going to smash them together for convenience. But if you believe this is the actual word of God, then you have to be like, okay, why is this the same story twice? What is happening?
Yeah.
And then Adam and Eve had kids who go off and find wives. Where did they come from, right? And I think the kind of simple explanation is because the story was written, thousands and thousands of years ago by people who didn't worry about all this stuff, right?
Right.
But if you take it literally, now you've got to do all this mental gymnastics, and this takes you to a place like, well, maybe some of these people were from space, right? Because it doesn't say that they were created in the story. And with LDS, it's also important to understand that the entire American continent and all of its inhabitants are not in the Bible.
No.
Right.
So this was a major problem for religious Europeans because they were like, well, this doesn't compute, right? What is all this stuff? And so Joseph Smith, part of his appeal was he said, well, no, I can explain all of this. I can make this stuff fit together.
Yeah, through the creating Zion in Missouri and
Right.
all that stuff.
Right.
Do
Yeah.
you think that's why
Exactly.
people like? I wasn't really taught the Bible. I asked, "Can I do it?" And they said, "No, that's for boys."
But you were raised in a fundamentalist
I was raised
community.
fundamentalist because they know like the kids start asking questions,
Yeah.
and like you can't do that. Just put out and shut up.
So you listened, you were like told by the preachers what to think, but you like, especially as a girl, I imagine,
Yeah.
you were like not told to study the Bible.
No, like explicitly told to not study it. A lot of Christians are like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, have you met Christians like this or studied Christians that, or is there even another religion like that where you don't study the text?
Yeah, I think fundamentalism goes back to these pamphlets written in 1910 called the Fundamentals, and what fundamentalism kind of eventually argued is the Bible is true in the same way that science and geology are true, and if it's not true in the same way that science is true, then it has no value and it's sort of just garbage, right? And this has really flattened and cheapened what has traditionally been sort of the value of books like Genesis, right? Genesis is useless as a science book, right? If there's any
Right.
truth in Genesis, it's things like, this is what it means to be human. This is our relationship with the universe and with the idea of a creator and so on, right? It's not meant to be kind of literally a history document, but fundamentalism kind of smashes that out, and it makes faith very, very brittle, all right, in a way where questions become dangerous, right?
Oh.
So I got slapped with. I had to teach this class called Philosophy in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. I'm not a philosopher, so I was kind of just doing the best that I could. And I'm posing these like old philosophical questions to these students. I have this one evangelical girl, and for every like profound like question that has haunted theologians throughout the ages, she had some weird little platitude that like she learned at Bible camp.
Oh,
Right?
like what? Can you give us an example, or is that like
Yeah,
a Hippocratic
so
oath?
we read this weird heretical Jewish text that I found really interesting. So I shared it with the students, and it's describing God's body. And it's like, going from like God's toe to his ankle is like 4,000 parsangs or something, which was some unit in the ancient Near East and so on. It sounds like Galactus from Marvel Comics or something.
Yeah.
And Jews condemn this. They said God doesn't have a body. This is blasphemy. And so I just asked them, like, why would somebody write this text? Like, why would someone make this and make copies of it and so forth? And so Bible camp girl raised her hand and says, well, what I learned at Bible camp is God is big enough to make the whole universe, but small enough to be your friend. Right. And so she had an answer like that for
Okay.
everything. And then we finally got to the problem of evil. And we said, why are babies born with leukemia? Right? If there's an all-loving, all-powerful God, why is a baby born with leukemia? And she said, well, for stuff like that, I would just ask my counselor. I would just ask the camp counselor. And I said, but what's going to happen when your camp counselor dies and you have to try to answer these questions yourself?
Oh.
And she just kind of like had this look of horror on her face, right? And then we had the summer break, and she signed up for another one of my classes in the fall. And she came and talked to me after class, and I mentioned something about, her perspective as a Christian or something. And she said, oh, no, I'm not a Christian anymore. I'm an atheist now.
Whoa.
Wow.
Which was not what I
man.
wanted. I don't want to,
Right.
I don't want any of my students to like change their religion or anything like that. But I think what happened was this was a student who was actually a very intelligent young woman, but had been given these kind of saccharine nonsense that was very fragile. And when she thought about it for just a little bit, it all snapped. And I think if they had used kind of the more sort of intellectual traditions in Christianity, they're a bit more flexible and a bit more open to thinking about things symbolically, that maybe she would still be a Christian.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe why there's a big purge of women leaving churches in general right now, because of the patriarchal nature and because a lot of there's women who I think naturally fit into those roles, but the ones who don't want to know things and have questions and are curious about other things, and that is very much not good.
And it's weird. They're told like you're naturally subservient, but it's like if you're naturally subservient, why am I being constantly like ridiculed and literally beaten if I ask a question?
Right. For sure. And that's definitely something that, a lot of the people we're going to be speaking to and have spoken with for the season are women who've left the church, and they have a lot of stuff to say that's not great. But it's also obviously anecdotal. Not everybody who's going through the Mormon church is experiencing abuse and forced into things. But
some people are having a nice time, and some women love it, and they want to have the kids in the farm life, and that's great. Like, I love it. I love the freedom of choice.
As long as they're not hurting their kids, because some of them are. But that also is something that I found interesting about the process in the LDS church that kind of reminds me of Scientology, where a lot of people who've come out of the church are open about how they didn't know certain aspects of their church that maybe outsiders do know, like including about the special processes, the second anointings, and the religious, the wedding ceremonies that you do, which are really kind of fucked up and really strange and kind of are supposed to be these things you fight for your whole life. And finally, when you get there, it's just this like room and you have to be like, awesome, wow.
So it's like worse when you keep things a secret, right? As opposed to just like, here it is, let's talk about it, let's learn.
Yeah, I mean, stories like this happen a lot, and I've even seen some data on people who left the LDS Church, and there's sort of charts of why they left. A surprisingly low one was, I don't believe any of this stuff is true. That was not the reason they were leaving. It was usually things like this is misogynistic, or the people are not acting with the values that they are professing. They're not being just, they're not being kind, and so forth. But there was a good chunk that was like, I don't actually think any of this ancient American history stuff actually happened. This is pretty implausible.
Wow.
Yeah, there's also I've listened to and spoken with people who also felt like deep pain because they wanted to support the beliefs. They wanted this to be true. They didn't want to let go of their beliefs, but they were challenged constantly by these things that were unbearable to them. And they didn't want to leave, but they felt like they couldn't stay. They wanted it to be true much longer than they believed it, if that makes sense. Are you familiar with other new religious movements that do these sort of levels the way that like the LDS and like Scientology does, where you kind of
UCB
level
classes
up by going through a bunch of different things, giving money, dedicating your millennia to the church and like doing these things, and like then you receive these special underwear and stuff? Is that something that is seen a lot in movements?
Well, honestly, I think the common thread here is what we call esotericism and what I think the public would call magic, right? L. Ron Hubbard was heavily involved with, Aleister Crowleyan magic. Joseph Smith was modeling some of his ideas off of Freemasonry, right? So this is a tradition that is built around secrecy and initiation, right? That you start off and we teach you a few things, and then you level up and you become second degree, or you become Ipsissimus Magister or whatever. We've got all these titles and ranks, and then we tell you more, and then eventually you're sort of like the Grand Master of the Temple or something like that. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that, and I do think there's a lot of sort of indigenous cultural traditions where there are societies, and if you're not a member of the society, that's secret knowledge, right? That only you can get, right? But I do think that is the common logic between both Scientology and some of the things you're describing in LDS, that it comes out of a tradition of esotericism. And for some people, right, that can be a real selling point, right? I really, really want to know what's at the next level. So who do I make my checkout to?
Right. Yeah. And that's, I guess that is true, that it's not an inherently bad thing. And do you think that there is something to be said about the newer it is, the more dangerous it is because there's like direct leadership still involved? Is that something that can make it more or less, I guess, dangerous to the society around them. I'm just thinking in the sense of when it's traditions that have been for a millennia, it feels more like nebulous and not so much like we're dedicating ourselves to like this group of dudes or this guy or this person, and they're the ones that have the answer.
Yeah. So in sociology, we call what you're talking about charisma, right? So I said earlier, if I went out and told people I have a message from God, you all need to join my church, I would really probably make much progress. But some people would, and those people we say are charismatic, or they have charismatic leadership, right?
The Riz.
So Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, Joseph Smith, all these people had charisma, and then when they died, the charisma got institutionalized, right? So if we look at like the Catholic Church, Catholics might even say like, my priest sucks, man. My priest is the worst priest. He's got bad hygiene. I think he's a drunk or whatever, but he was made a priest by someone who was made a priest, but going back to Jesus. So the charisma from 2,000 years ago is still keeping the whole institution going, right? So once charisma gets institutionalized, it gets a lot more stable. There's less chance of kind of radical, chaotic things happening. But if it's fresh, then there is a kind of danger to it. So these movements that end in violent events like Waco, like Jonestown. Another factor that they all have, in addition to millennialism, is a charismatic leader. And the thing about charisma is you can lose it at any moment. Okay, it's not like a D&D character sheet where you have a high charisma score. If your followers see you like fart or something, like it's gone. They realize you're just like us, right? And so how a lot of these violent scenarios come out, and you see this especially, I think, with cases like Jim Jones and Waco, is the leader knows how fragile that their authority is, and they're like, if I realize that we actually can't build a utopia here in the jungle like I told everybody we could, or if I go out and let the FBI put me in handcuffs, then they're going to see I'm not this messiah figure. I'm just like them, right? So that can be one reason why charismatic authority leads to kind of instability and potentially violence, in a way that more institutionalized authority, well, that can have other kinds of problems. It's got that stability.
Yeah.
There was that one LDS leader that's in prison for all the polygamy and like...
Well, FLDS, yeah.
The FLDS. And people love him even more because, he's being tested by God because he's in jail right now. I'm like, no, he's in jail because he was trying to have sex with children.
He was achieving it. He wasn't trying.
He was.
Yeah. So leaders of new religious movements who have charismatic authority, they will do all kinds of moves to try to maintain their charisma, right? And one of them is, I'm just going to retreat. I'm just going to be like Willy Wonka in the Chocolate Factory. I'm just going to be. Everybody knows I'm out there, but nobody's seen me in years. Osho did this with the Rajneeshis. He just kind of disappeared for a while. And so Warren
David
Jeffs,
Miscavige is hiding currently. of Scientology, David Miscavige is hiding, but it's also partly because he's being pursued by the federal government.
I actually saw David Miscavige with my own eyes.
Where? Kroger?
Kroger. He was in Austin, Texas, where they reopened the Scientology center that's been there. But nobody knew he was going to show up. And because I'm a religion professor, the Scientologists invited me to the grand opening. But it was only when I had like gotten past all the protesters and past all the security that there was any mention that David Miscavige would be there. And he came and gave this speech. And then he just sort of retreated into a chapel, and nobody could actually like talk to him or interact with him in any way.
Oh my God, that's so fascinating. I don't think I would ever meet another person who's met David Miscavige before. That's so cool.
Whoa, was he short?
Again, I didn't meet him, but I saw him give a
you saw
speech,
him.
Yeah. He has like 5'6" energy, right?
He's very small.
He was small. Yeah, and this is another thing is charisma. Again, it's not like a D&D score, right? In I assume enough people are familiar with, but in D&D, if you have a high charisma, anybody you talk to is impressed by the way that you talk, right? Usually how charisma works is only your followers are impressed by the way that you talk. So, I mean, some people were like weeping at his speech. And my first thought was, I think you got ChatGPT and I think you asked, give me some jokes about Texas.
Really? What were some of the jokes?
I've got to give. It was just like, guys, this isn't your first rodeo, and we're gonna pull ourselves up by our cowboy bootstraps, and It's just, as someone who grew up in Austin, I'm just like banging my head on the floor, right? And I'm like, and most of the people in the crowd were not from Austin because this was really a global effort because there aren't really that many active Scientologists out there. So they were flying people in from all over to have a good turnout for this event. So people were asking me all these questions about Austin because they weren't getting the references in the speech because they'd never been to Austin before.
Wow. What was the
Wow.
speech about? Like
Well,
Xenu?
they reopened this center. The center's been there my whole life, but they have sort of renovated it, and they had formed alliances with people in the neighborhood. So they had people come up and talk about, thanks to Scientology, we've whatever, put some trees on that on Main Street or kind of whatever it is. And they had some kind of new, program that they were rolling out, which, the Scientology loves to have like hyper specific names for everything.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And they were like, and we're gonna make, Texas the first, gold with chocolate sprinkles state or something like that. It was some big plan for everything, and everybody's cheering and so forth. But being on the outside of Scientology, I wasn't really clear on what was being announced or if this would honestly even matter, right? But anyways, there is now a big renovated Scientology facility across from the University of Texas at Austin, and they
Whoa.
are really encouraging curious students to come across the street and go check it out.
Wow.
But
They're
Texas
still going
is,
for it.
they're
Huh?
super Christian. I'm surprised it'd be fine with Scientology right across from like where the kids can be indoctrinated.
Yeah, I mean, it's a free country, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Scientologists
Right.
have been there for forever. When the movie came out, I forget what Going Clear. When Going Clear came out, somebody drove their truck through the front of the building.
Whoa,
Um,
really?
yeah,
What
which
a
I
Texas
obviously
response.
I condemn.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, of course.
Violence like that. So, but there is that kind of conservative Christian attitude of these people aren't welcome here.
I'd cut you off before you were describing different kinds of leaders.
Oh, like OSHA? Osho?
Osho?
Yeah. So David Miscavige, I think, is, as you said, kind of retreating from the public eye because of kind of legal issues and people trying to subpoena him. But for Warren Jeffs, I think actually going to prison was good for his charisma, right? Because they don't have to interact with the actual Warren Jeffs. They can imagine, right, this martyred Warren Jeffs wasting away in prison, who's the only sort of true voice for God. So in a weird way, sort of removing the leader can actually make the leader's authority stronger.
Yeah, and actually, that is something that we are kind of seeing with Tim Ballard, as well as when we covered Josh Duggar. I don't know if you know much about him, but he was basically, his family and his community, his church, the IBLP, were trying to champion him to like go into government and stuff after he had been caught molesting children because he was being pursued by the devil so hard and he fought so hard that he was now uplifted. In fact, he was still just molesting and assaulting children that whole time. But when he got caught as a young man, because the devil wanted him so badly that's how they knew that he was meant for greatness, because of how much
Right.
the devil was pursuing him. And I do feel like Tim Ballard right now, he was excommunicated last year. I think by really force of hand. I don't think they wanted to, but he was being pitted as the next prophet, like by the leadership of the church. And so he's also in his what's it called? When they get their fortunes told by the leaders of the church, his was to become the president of the United States and the prophet of the LDS Church. And so he was really elevated by the church and the members of the church. And so now that he has these really horrible, very clear, credible accusations against him, it's almost like some people are quadrupling down on him being this Messiah figure.
Yeah, and I mean, one term that comes up a lot, especially in cultic studies, is cognitive dissonance, right? But the cognitive dissonance theory is if there's two things that are clearly can't both be true, like this guy is blessed by God to be president and he's molesting people, right, and a horrible crime, this creates this kind of a mental kind of psychic pain. And the theory is that you will begin doing weird things to try to relieve that pain, right? And so one way could be doubling down and saying things like, well, if there's people are saying anything bad about him, that's because the devil wants to take him out, and therefore all these bad things that he's accused of really proves that he must be the Messiah, right, and destined to be president. That's a move that I see sometimes. But yeah, people. This is one of the things I find very interesting about religion is people do not behave rationally,
No.
right, and they do all kinds of things that don't make any logical, coherent sense.
Yeah, he is himself has been saying this quite a bit. It's just so horrible. It's kind of hard to even wrap your mind around, but he is to keep people on his side is using the methodology of if you are fighting against me, you are for child assault. Like if you are coming for me, the money that would have saved children is going to,
Right.
these women are trying to get the money away from us so we can't help kids anymore. And people are buying it. And it is really, I don't blame it on the church, but the church has helped make him relevant and helped validate him, or the leadership of the church, I should say. And the guy who really did the most damage in this way is still highly regarded in the church, is the guy Tom Harrison, who I had mentioned. So they sort of excommunicated Tim Ballard, but not any of the people who kind of sent him upwards, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the whole situation seems like kind of a microcosm of what's happening in our country right now, right?
Yeah.
Because I know LDS people who are, I think they're a bit conservative, but they're basically good people. They're basically reasonable people. And this sort of radical millennialist group that is doing really horrible things is on the brink of completely taking over this church, right? Or has certainly made approaches to do that. And I think Americans are a bit conservative, but basically good people. And Matt Gaetz and Trump, who's Epstein said he was Trump's best friend for 10 years, are now taking over the country.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
And it's almost like, well, if you go after Trump with all these accusations, then it's like, well, you're taking away from him saving the country. Mm-hmm. So the more you speak out about, hey, Matt Gaetz was caught with an underage girl trafficking her across state lines. For me to say that, it's like, oh, well, you're taking up valuable space and time that they could be saving America, when really they're hurting it.
Yeah, it's sort of a nebulous form of saving America too. There's not really a plan.
Yeah. When evil people take over, though, this is where the prophet figure can actually be necessary, right? Because if the law of the land is now basically evil and we all have to salute the pedophile or whatever, right? This is the place where you need someone to actually come in who has charisma and can say, no, what you're doing is wrong, right? What you're doing is evil, and it doesn't matter if the quorum of 12 goes along with it, or it doesn't matter if the Republican-controlled Senate goes along with it. Evil is still evil. So this is why I think, well, prophecy is dangerous. It does still have kind of a place, right?
Yeah.
So it would take another prophet, I guess, to battle the battle of prophets.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Well, if you read the Hebrew Bible, that's literally happening all the time. You have prophets yelling at each other. You have prophets with false spirits and stuff like that. But the kind of classic example of this is King David, who becomes evil, right? He kills Goliath, and we're all happy about him. And then he becomes this really awful, leader who is just literally having his soldiers killed so he can bang their wives, right?
Whoa.
Daenerys Targaryen.
Yeah. we know from the recent Epstein tape that apparently that was one of Trump's favorite hobbies, right? To see if I can sleep with my friends' wives, right? And so this prophet named Nathan is the first person to say it doesn't matter that you're the king, right? What you're doing is not acceptable, right? And people are like, yeah, the prophet's right. Just because you're a king, you can't do these things. So as a religion scholar, when I see all the kind of suffering and evil brought about by some of these groups, I do believe that, religion is like fire. It does a lot of terrible, terrible things in the world. It also has at least the potential to maybe do some good in certain situations.
Do you think that there is a connection to the political movement that's happening and the amount of crime that seems to have been coming out of the LDS Church in recent years? Because I'm trying to make sure I'm not just having like confirmation bias, because I've been covering these things, but I really feel like I've attempted to look at different religious movements in this time period, and it seems to be the LDS Church is experiencing a lot more high volume like abuse stuff.
Is it because the millennialism of like, well, it's going to end soon, let's all fuck the kids and kill each other?
I don't know, but do you think that there
Should I
is...
take that out? Was that too much? I don't know.
No, it was great.
Well, the world's going to end soon, so let's all kill each other.
I would like to think some people, when the world is going to end, wouldn't immediately want to have sex with children is the first thing.
Right.
But I guess some people would. But do you think that there is a connection to like the greater political climate and the sort of extremist-ish actions that have been happening?
Yeah, I mean, I should make a caveat, which is I think it's really important to avoid double standards, right? So when there are lone wolf terrorist attacks by Muslims,
right,
we probably wouldn't say, well, obviously Islam is making people commit terrorism. They're all potential terrorists. So I want to be clear, like most Mormons don't think that people are zombies and have to be killed, right?
Right.
I want to throw all the Mormons away on this because some of them I think can be allies. I looked at reviews of this book, and there were lots of Mormons saying this is heretical, right?
Oh, Visions of Glory. Yeah.
Visions of Glory, yeah. They were saying this is not for good Mormons. However, to your point, I think millennialism is a factor, right? Because if the world as we know it is about to end, right, not just the world is going to end, but the norms of behavior that govern this world are about to be irrelevant too. And definitely the laws of this world are going to be irrelevant soon too. So all you really have to do is kind of wear down the clock. And we see that with many millennialist movements. And I think the other thing is, people can now look, well, if you lie and steal your whole life and do terrible things and are rapists, you get to go to the White House.
Yeah.
Right? So what incentive do people have to be good except for the sake of goodness, which many people are not interested in?
That's the part of
vertical morality.
Well, yeah, I think that's sort of touching on that is like I just never grew up in religion, so I don't have that basis, but I think it's scary that you need a book or a person to tell you to not kill people.
Yeah, so again, we don't actually know what charisma is, but certain situations seem to just make people spontaneously graft onto the leader and be like, that's our guy. That guy will save us, right? And when I talk about this with students, I actually showed them this clip from the movie Avengers, where Captain America shows up and the police have never seen Captain America. They have no idea who this guy is, right? And he starts telling the police, we're being attacked by aliens. You got to go do this. You got to do that. The police say, why should we listen to you? And then some aliens land and Captain America beats them all up and the police immediately follow. They're like, do what the guy in spandex says, right? So if you are impressed by somebody, right, people tend to do this. And there's lots of reasons why that's terrible. I mean, in real life, I would hope the New York Police Department has like a proper chain of command and doesn't just listen to some guy in spandex, right? But I do think that probably humans have survived because we are a highly social animal. And we have a tendency in emergency situations to just rally around a leader.
Like a confident person.
Right.
A confident person that probably helped us survive, saber-toothed tigers and things like that in the past. But when we're talking about a democracy with hundreds of millions of people, that's a terrible way to fix our problems, right?
Yeah.
But we have a tendency to do that. And I think we need to talk more about kind of that aspect of human psychology to latch on to the savior figure or the leader.
So do you think that there is a healthy relationship that can exist between therapy and very specific religious beliefs? Because I think part of what we're seeing happen in a lot of these groups, because a lot of them come from the psychotherapy or connected to psychotherapy amongst Mormons, is that they're taking an education that is, I don't know, mainstream or accepted by a wider scope of people, and then mixing in things that most people would consider really unhealthy, but they have the credentials of being in the therapy world. Have you ever seen that exist in any other way? And do you think that that's something that can exist in a healthy way, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, most counseling is through religious communities, right? I mean, therapists are expensive, but lots of people can go to a priest or a pastor for free and get advice. And sometimes that advice could be really good. Like if you feel like a piece of shit, and your priest tells you, you know what, you're made in God's image. God doesn't make junk. Get out there,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
That can be really good, right?
Yeah.
Or, people, we need cultural literacy. People from different religious backgrounds see the world in different ways, and we need to know that to create a therapeutic alliance. But in the cases that you're talking about with figures like Barbara Snow, it is not a matter of religious belief whether or not satanic cults are killing 10,000 babies a year. That is just not true,
Right.
right? And so it is not the place of a therapist to make factual claims that are objectively and demonstrably false. So I think that's a pretty clear line, right? And beyond that, I think that there can be, religious ideas like you were talking about earlier. If your therapist is telling you, well, you're a woman, so you ought to be more submissive or something like that, I think that's pretty toxic. I don't think that's likely to help people. That might be a subjective religious-based claim, but I think that's pretty demonstrably unhealthy.
Yeah, the stuff that's coming out of like Tom Harrison and Jody Hildebrandt was using LDS doctrine to justify like with Jody specifically severe abuse, like physical abuse, child torture,
Like locking your kids up in a safe.
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So that seems like, and the Tom Harrison stuff where he's having visions and putting these books out, but also like practicing psychotherapy seems to me like it could be an issue. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
No, 100%. And also, there's no definition of what religion is, right? Which means there's no line where religion ends and psychotherapy begins.
For real? There's no
right?
definition of religion?
Well, in religious studies, there is absolutely no definition of religion. But even in the American legal system, like the IRS can decide if you're a church or not.
Right.
But that's about it. And the Supreme Court has deliberately ducked answering the question of what religion is because they don't want people to try to, reverse engineer.
Not pay taxes.
So now's the time to start.
I was called, because I do classes on exorcism, and I was called last summer this by a forensic psychiatrist, and she said, I've got this guy in the state hospital for his crimes. She didn't say what his crimes were, but he says he's possessed by a demon and that he can shoot demons out of his eyes and possess other people.
Cool.
I think he's schizophrenic, but the state doesn't want to pay to incarcerate him anymore. Or they keep him in the hospital. They want to put him in general population. So they've said, well, this is just his religion. He just has an odd religious faith.
Wow.
It doesn't mean, who are we to medicalize this and claim it's schizophrenic? And she was like, can you help? But I think there's always this line between kind of what is in kind of a medical register as a medical problem or issue or something, and what is a matter of religion. And one of these things is supposed to be kind of sacrosanct and the government can't mess with it. And the other one is supposed to be kind of something where we feel like we have a right to intervene. But it's often more of a gray area than people realize.
I think now is a good time. I could start a religion based on women that left the Christian church and just be like, hey, we believe in God, but not these patriarchal values. And we want to do good things, and we'll call it whore's divorce.
Whore's divorce.
That's right.
And then you don't have to pay taxes anymore.
Nope, no taxes.
Okay, cool. I love
Follow
that.
me.
You mentioned when you were here the other day, something I think you were calling it the Big Five.
Mm-hmm.
It was about Doomsday.
Uh-huh.
Those are big catastrophes, correct? Is that the groups that were practicing a doomsday culture then had like big massive casualties? Is that what that is in reference to?
Yeah, so the Big Five were groups that there was either mass suicide or something that looked like mass suicide or some kind of mass casualty event, right? We know that most new religious movements actually just die out quietly within a few years, right? So those are not normal, but if I ask people to name a cult, they will probably name Waco or Jim Jones within the first three guesses,
It doesn't have to do with just the group practicing a doomsday methodology. It's just if that has occurred and then a big mass casualty event has happened, right? Okay. I just wanted to clear up because I was trying to remember if you had said it just had to do with big groups who had a doomsday methodology. But I guess there's probably been many more than 5 of those groups.
Yeah, so all these cases are unique, and we try to figure out, okay, what do they all have in common so we can prevent this, right, from happening in the future. So we're like, okay, they're all millennialist. They all have a charismatic leader. They all felt basically threatened by outside forces, either legitimately or illegitimately. But like in Texas in 2008, Fred Phelps was already in prison, but he had this community called the Yearning for Zion Ranch, And the police, based on a false tip, did this like giant paramilitary raid with tanks and everything, exactly what they did at Waco. And all the factors were there. We said this is a millennialist group. They have a charismatic leader. They're being attacked by an outside force. Nothing happened. Nobody got hurt. Right.
Wow.
So we're still trying to figure out what the formula is. Right.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's great. Just because that is sort of, it seems like all of these really scary red flag things are popping up in the church community, but there is really nothing to be done about it. You just sort of go like, this seems like maybe it's not good, but I don't know. They're also just a bunch of people who are normal inside the church, not all preparing for the last day. But that the Doomsday Prepper community is not small inside the LDS Church, so that is something that is like kind of scary.
It took us a long time to figure out, gosh, the people who are best positioned to help us stop Islamic terrorism are Muslims, right? So I think in the same way, if you're concerned about people like Tim Ballard, we need to try to ally ourselves with people who are LDS and say Tim Ballard does not speak for me.
That's good.
Is there like a healthy line between Doomsday cult and also like, oh, I just want to have some extra beans and like a flashlight and a compass?
Prepping.
like is there like a line there? Or because I would, I'm like gathering stuff for just in case LA has an earthquake.
Yeah, I mean, or like toilet paper hoarding, right? Which we all tried to do during COVID. I mean, I think people don't realize this. This has been an LDS tradition since the beginning. I think every LDS household is supposed to have like a year's worth of supplies.
Okay,
and
but
my
that's
wife,
good, though.
Yeah, it is good. No, and my wife wrote a book on how different religions dealt with death during the pandemic.
Oh, really? I didn't know your wife was an author too. That's cool.
No, she's also a religious studies professor, and she said actually the LDS did really well during the pandemic because they've been prepping all.
They were like, finally, our time is here.
And there were Catholics who were like, well, I have to be handed a cracker by somebody's fingers. I don't care if it's a pandemic, right? But the LDS could just have a prophecy, and they're like, yeah, guys, God says during the pandemic, we got to do Zoom services or whatever, and everyone just kind of falls into line. So they had an ability to kind of turn on a dime, and she actually interviewed some people who converted during the pandemic.
Wow.
Interesting.
They said, my LDS neighbors seem to have everything together, so I was impressed.
What's your wife's book called?
The book is called Shattered Grief, and it looks at, Jews and Hindus and Muslims and all these people who have, very specific expectations for how a funeral is to be performed and so on, and then none of this could be done. It all had to be kind of jury-rigged to accommodate a social distancing, and some people renounced their faith during the pandemic, and some people doubled down on it. So it's a really very interesting study. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Wow, that's great. We'll definitely, promote your books and everything when this comes out. But is there anything else you wanted to say or promote or anything on the show?
Yeah, The Exorcist Effect is out. It's about religion and horror movies, and there's a whole chapter on the Warrens with stuff that nobody, I think, knew about them before.
Wow.
And then I have a book coming out next year called The Penguin Book of Cults, and that's going to have primary documents from actually like ancient groups that people were afraid of, and freaking out about thousands of years ago, but also
sick.
Also groups like Heaven's Gate and Waco and Jonestown. I actually accessed all these FBI documents that most people have never seen from the Waco siege, and those are going to be in the book too.
Okay, great. Dude, thank you so much for doing this. This was so informative and fun. Thank you.
Well, I learned a lot actually just doing homework to prepare for this. So I'm really glad that y'all are actually getting the word out about these things, because I do think with everything going on, this is flown under the radar, but I think it's important. So I really am grateful for the work that you guys are doing on your podcast.
Oh, thank you so much, man. Thank you. Hell yeah, dude. I am looking forward to your book coming, and we'll definitely read it. And I know Henry and Marcus will be psyched to talk to you guys.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Well, have a good day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your time, Joe.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, y'all. This was fun.
Bye-bye.